Ladies and gentlemen, our speaker this evening is Peter Walsh. Peter was a history teacher until he retired. He's an author. He wrote a book about the First World War in Washington. And tonight he's going to give us a talk on the 12 Lambtons.
Moral support, and I chose John Fogerty, whose song was "Put Me in, Coach, I'm ready to play today," and I hope you're ready to listen as well. Okay, we shall see. Where are we? Burnmoor, right. So in Burnmoor, if you pass it on the number 8 bus or in your car, it's the Lambton Memorial to Beatrix, the second daughter of the Duke of Abercorn. She lived until 1871, and the cross was erected in 1871. She being one of 13 children herself, had 13 children in 15 years to George Frederick Darcy, the second Earl of Durham, and he, of course, is the son of Penshire Monument, Earl of Durham, and the third Earl of Durham was one of his sons. So you've got George Frederick Darcy, and he had 13 children by Beatrix. Some of the names on there's Frederick William, who was the third Earl's twin brother, who you'll hear about briefly. Beatrice is on there. Sir William, who actually died in the Cap d'Agde in France, where he went for warm weather after his career in the army had finished. So there are 4 or 5 there. Most of the Lambtons, of course, spread out. They're scattered across the country, and they're buried where they died in later years. But it is a splendid monument to the family. Lambton Castle is where they lived, and Phil Rear, who's just come in tonight, just vouchsafed the information from the housekeeper of Lambton Castle that there are 100 rooms. I didn't know that until this evening. See how flexible I can be? You tell me something that I don't know, and you may well know plenty of things that I don't know. I'm happy to incorporate them into the speech. As Tom Lehrer said, plagiarize, let no one's work evade your eyes. It's always a good lesson if you're going to do talks. So here they are, the 13 of them. I'm going to talk about 12 tonight, and the 13th, we leave him out. But to help me, as well as perhaps to help you slightly, we've got Frederick, Darcy, Claude, Jack, and his twin brother, Frederick William, Hedworth, William, George, and Charles, and along the front, Eleanor, or Nellie, Beatrice, Kitty, or Catherine, and sad Lady Anne. I'll tell you why she was sad later on. But they're a splendid brood, and that picture was taken at Montague House in Whitehall, and I suspect it may have been taken about the same time as a picture of the Duchess of Abercorn, who was having her 91st birthday, that you'll see in a minute. So here they are, the 13 or the 12 that we'll be talking about tonight, and also Jack. Helpfully, I've put red dots on the foreheads, not as targets of people who I can identify as definitely being Lambton, but I believe that is Jack. That's one of his brothers, I'm not sure which. That, I think, is his twin brother, Frederick William, and there's another one there. There's Hedworth at the back, and really, because of the girls' frocks and hats and stuff, it's much more difficult to identify them, but I suspect that several of the duchesses will be in there. There were 3 duchesses and Lady Anne as the 4 sisters of that particular generation. So that's Lady Abercorn, and you know how these things can seem to come up coincidentally. Trevor Thorne at the archives the same time as me. Well, my wife's daughter lives in Abercorn Terrace, and there is the lady after whom, or perhaps it was one of her predecessors, after whom it was named in Edinburgh. So what about these 12 Lambtons then that I'm going to talk about? Fairly briefly, for obvious reasons. 12 going into 50 minutes gives me about 5 minutes on each one. So here's Francis. And the photograph is somewhat grainy, but he was born in 1871. He became a second lieutenant in the Royal Horse Guards. His nickname was Pickles, and he was killed very early in the Great War at Zandvoort in 1914. He was 43 years old, perhaps slightly old to volunteer, but duty was duty, and a man had to do what a man had to do. He's listed on the Menin Gate. Before he joined the army, he had been a racehorse manager, not a trainer exactly, but a manager of horses, including those belonging to Sir Ernest Cassel, a famous German banker who was such a good friend of the king that he was sometimes called Windsor Castle. Eh? Do you know? There was wit in those days as well. So here's a letter, which I looked at in the Lambton archives. I was allowed to see. My dear Jack, I don't know how to write to you about Pickles, but I fear I must start by saying there's little hope. Just before we were ordered to retire from our trench, where we'd been heavily shelled for 3 days, he was half buried by earth, but his men got him out and he'd walked several yards when he was seen to fall and lie quite still, and we think he must have been shot by a bullet. If, however, he was only wounded, he ought to be safe, as the Germans must have been in our trench within a quarter of an hour, and they would have attended him, but the only 2 men who survived, who were left near him, think that he was killed. And that was from a fellow officer called Richard Molyneux. So that letter in Lambton Archive. After his death, Francis's bequests were of 21,000. His estate was 21,000. He left 5,000 to sad Lady Anne, who was probably cheered a little by that, 5,000 to Darcy, his brother, 5,000 to Sir William. Neither of them would have needed it, but nevertheless. And among others, £5 to Mary Vaughan, his housemaid, £25 or down to £5 for his headman, his travelling headman, his clerk, his cook, his housemaid, and various other employees. So those were reasonable sums of money to be left by somebody who was worth a couple of million at his death. A couple of million in modern day terms, of course. The fact that he'd been killed allowed the 3rd Earl of Durham to point that out to people when he was recruiting in Durham during the early part of the Great War and later as well. My brother was killed in the war, and I also lost a nephew. That's his nephew, Geoffrey, son of his twin brother, Frederick William. Geoffrey was killed at Villers Cotterets. He was in the 2nd Coldstream Guards, son of Frederick William, and killed in Villers Cotterets in September 1914. So the early days of the war were cutting a scythe through the aristocrats. And if you look at some of the war diaries of the Great War, it's fascinating, especially in what I would call posh regiments, where you got Lieutenant Lord somebody. You know, they all had their titles and they had a military rank as well, and they were expected, their titles were given every time they were mentioned. So were all their medals. So war diaries consist of Lieutenant so-and-so, MC, DSO, et cetera, et cetera. They've got to get those things in there, in the war diaries. It was the done thing. So we've dealt then with Francis, killed in the war, racehorse trainer. After the war, in June of 1919, they opened or unveiled a stained glass window in Burnmoor Church, the church that you saw before on the first slide. And it was dedicated to, in this case, Francis, but there was another one to Geoffrey, and there was a third one to Mrs. Reynolds, who was the wife of a long-serving vicar in Burnmoor. So 2 war heroes, not that they had much time to be heroic, and Mrs. Reynolds.
Subscribe to our channel and we'll let you know when there's a new video to watch. The subscribe button is below the video next to the like, share and comment icons. To watch another video, Just click on one of the pictures above the arrows now.